All right, hi everyone. Today we are going to be talking about raising the funds and how we can improve the success of women in the venture-backed technology ecosystem, build a more accessible community that reflects the diversity of the world around us. So the panel speakers today, I will start with the person closest to me. This is Sonali. She's the Chief Operating Officer and CPO and Entrepreneur in Residence at Kiva. And then to her right, we have Joanne, who's a partner at Foundation Capital. And then to her right, we have Holly Liu, who's the founder of Kabam and a partner at YCombinator.
Visiting partner.
Visiting partner at YCombinator, which my company also went through. So you weren't there when I was there. Okay, cool. So I thought a good place to start for the Raising the Funds panel would be, instead of starting from a more general level, just to sort of establish that, like, do we think there is a problem? Do we think that women are facing problems when it comes to raising funding, specifically venture funding? And if so, why that would be the case?
I think there's a problem. I mean, you just have to look at the numbers. Only 2% of venture capital goes to women. And that's $84 billion total, so women only get 2% of that. That's really, really tiny. And I think that there's something amiss. I don't think there's only 2% of women that are making venture-backed companies. I think there's more than that. I think there's probably a higher deal flow. I think that partially maybe not as many women are asking for venture. I see that. I also think that there is implicit bias when you do ask that. I believe that. And I think it's a problem.
I would echo that sentiment. I should have actually worn my t-shirt that says, "Girls just want to have funds." It's very I totally forgot about it, but thank you guys for being here. I completely agree with Holly. I think one of my best friends is a female founder, and I kind of saw her go through the fundraising journey in a very detailed way, and every single day we would debrief, and I would ask her about her experiences, what are her conversations like, what are the questions she got, and those experiences were very, very different, in my opinion, from someone who was a male founder. I also, we've been hosting these female founders events for about 3 years now. I joined Foundation about 4 years ago, before this was really, an issue in the Valley, or at least talked about this much. And from those groups of women, and that group kind of grew year over year, this resonated for everyone, right? So I do think there's a lot of work to be done.
I want to start with a thank you to everyone, but also to share my perspective is a little unique. So I do work for Kiva, and I don't know how many of you know, but Kiva is a crowdfunding platform for entrepreneurs all over the world who are looking for, on average, $500 of funding. So maybe a little bit different from the VC world. But it's interesting because we know that giving women support, especially entrepreneurs, are more likely to really elevate entire communities and our entire society. So it's really interesting to think about how, in this very clear way, when we're thinking about microfinance, how we have so much evidence that investing in women can really make a difference for all of us. Yet if you think about women who are trying to build businesses, and especially purpose-driven businesses, so often are not getting the same type of funding in the VC world. So I certainly can see that stark difference. I'm also entrepreneur in residence at JFF, which is a 35-year-old nonprofit which focuses on helping low-income Americans find economic mobility and meaningful work. And with this transition to future of work and automation and so much technology taking place, I was really excited to join this foundation to really help us think about how women can be a big part of this future and helping us build solutions that really help marginalized populations find meaningful work. So for me, coming from this perspective and this background really shows this contrast of the opportunity that we could have by investing in women more, and we are far, far, far from there yet.
It sounds like it's a problem like from the top to the bottom. So whether at the bottom, you have these women who are seeking $500 microfinance loans, they're facing the same type of discrimination as female venture capitalists who are trying to raise their own funds and trying to raise LP capital from institutions and endowments. Do they all give the same excuses? What types of reasons do people give for not investing in women? Because you don't hear a lot of people come out and say, I just don't think women can be good entrepreneurs. They always say something different.
So for us, at Foundation, I don't think it's so much a bias or discrimination. It's more just the type of deals that we see and who's running these companies. We've backed a lot of female founders. Lynn from Sunrun, she took her company public. I think she was pregnant during her IPO roadshow. We have Teresa from Atheros, also another public company, and many, many examples of that. So we have invested actually quite a lot in female founders. I think the challenge is that we don't see that many female founders. It's a little bit easier for me because I have proactively developed that network, right? Tomorrow I'm going to Napa with 10 female founders for fun, right? But the rest of my firm is mostly men, nothing wrong with that. And I think their natural networks just don't give them access to that. And so there has to be a systematic effort to discover who's working on these companies.
Yeah, I don't know if in their heads when investors or VCs or anybody on the giving and choosing side are literally saying, oh, it's because you're a woman. I think that we don't give you money or we don't give that. I think what it is oftentimes it's I feel like I'm a left-handed person in a right-handed world. Things just that men tend to get a pass, and I tend to get second-guessed more, or there's just really deep ingrained biases that you don't even realize, I think, that come out. So all the excuses that I think men hear, I think women hear, but I do think even more so because they don't live that life. One large excuse that I do see, a common trend, and I don't know if excuse, but response is I just don't see this as a big market. Because most of the time when you're pitching to somebody, the most important thing is getting this picture in their mind of what it is you're doing. And once they could get that picture in their mind, then they can lodge and start to the next logical step. Okay, I know what they're doing. The next step is this a problem? Is there a market for that? And unfortunately, if you're not living a certain life, then you may not have those problems. Left-handed people have a lot of problems driving stick shift, right? And that's a huge problem for them, but I wouldn't know that if I'm not left-handed. And so I think that's really hard. A lot of markets get missed because of that, and they just think oh, it's just too small because they can't envision themselves in that problem. That's probably one of the more common, quote unquote, I don't know if it's excuses, but something in their head is really real.
I really like that analogy of the left-handed in a right-handed world. But I also think that that's something slightly different from what Joanne was saying, which was that there just are not enough women there to begin with. So it's a question of, is it a matter of the pipeline problem, as is so often heard in tech, or is it a filtering problem? Is it the pipeline or is it the filter?
So I think comparatively on what you see, I think it's more of an outreach problem. You can argue that the pipeline is what it is, but why should it be that way, right? Why should it be that it's not 50-50 in the pipeline? So I just think that people aren't necessarily outreaching either in the right way or thinking about how can I make that pipeline number change. So I don't know if it's a pipeline problem, because that automatically assumes that just people aren't qualified enough to get into the pipeline. So a great example of this was, I believe, CMU. They had made this correlation that people who did well in computer science wasn't people who had coded before, and that's what they had required. They actually found out that it was how well you did in math classes. And once they changed that requirement, not only did obviously people do better in computer science, but it became almost 50-50 men and women.
Wow.
So I think you have to really look at the restrictions. So in some ways, I guess it is a filtering problem into getting into the pipeline, but I just don't I just wonder, I mean, if you really think about how we're set up and how the whole education system has been set up, it has been set up by right-handed people, men, in a certain way, set up, even the Socratic method that has not been changed for years. And there may be something there that there could be a lot more qualified people. It's just we're looking at the wrong qualifications to even fill the pipeline.
So that brings me back to Sonali. What kinds of driving factors and do you think are necessary to facilitate more female entrepreneurs from the top to the bottom? And is there anything unifying, or is it different for each person?
So I have been advising a lot of women who are purpose-driven and building startups and have been raising money from venture capital to really drive their business forward, and they've hit challenges along the way, and they are individual, but at the end of the day, it's a combination of all of these things is really the truth. There's no single one answer, but I have seen women who have been raising more money every year than have ever been raised before. So taking Shivani, who has started Tala, she recently raised a really large round, and she's an example that other people can now feel more confident that they're the type of voice that funders will fund. But she also is, a petite woman who walks into a room and yet has commanded this amount of energy. And that's probably many factors and many trials. And I've seen her speak to many venture capitalists along the way, and I think it was different roadblocks at different points. But the real point is, I would flip it around and say, what VCs are going to be able to find the people that have been passed over and are going to be building the companies that are going to be incredibly successful. And right now there are tons of female entrepreneurs who are building businesses that are going to be successful, and it's really, to what you're speaking about, some of them are there, and the VCs that are looking for them are going to be the ones that are going to be very successful in the end. It's like that missed opportunity right now.
No, I really like that. So essentially the VCs that don't invest in women, they're the ones that are missing out. So just transitioning over to some of what you were saying with, there being more and more women every year who are able to get past this hurdle in a sense. What kinds of factors do you think play into that individual's ability to get past the hurdle? Is it having sufficient gravitas, as you say, or is it just being in the right markets that the VC can't say that it's a market problem? What kinds of things make it so that there are individual women who make it past the filter?
So I think on the investor side, one of the things I've noticed about women, pitching to us compared to, say, men pitching to us is that, men tend to talk about the future a lot. Like, I'm going to do X, right? Not like I've done X, but I'm going to do this, and I want to do this because my background is so awesome. I went to, Harvard and Stanford and blah 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 blah, right? It's all about like believe in me. Whereas women are much more focused on this is what I've done. Like maybe it's very capital efficient, or let me prove to you because data is what's worth it, right? And I would encourage, the left-hand, right-hand analogy, I really relate to that. Unfortunately, it is the world we live in, and I would encourage female entrepreneurs to talk about what you are going to do as well, right? Because VCs, a lot of them are very used to hearing that. And fundamentally, I think that translates to, hey, we want to back this person because we believe that person has kind of this overconfidence to deliver.
I kind of think that it's incredibly difficult to make a startup, period. It's like a 98% slaughter rate, and I feel like the market knows no gender. However, that being said, I do think that it's like, especially when you're starting up, it's like you're in this rowboat and it's super janky. And some people, like if the system's set up better, men just get a better rowboat. Mine's made out of chopsticks and I've got a couple holes in it. And they're like, why don't you get as far? Well, I'm like busy trying to plug these holes over here. And so I certainly think that the market is certainly, like the waters, is very much not forgiving to anybody. It does not care. But at the same time, the equipment that's given for you to be able to kind of overcome that market, it's just so much better because of the systems that's set up for that. So I'm becoming more and more, like, I'm convinced that the women who do decide to go down a venture-backed route are like several times better. They're like MacGyvers because they are sitting there rowing that boat with chopsticks. And I'm like, okay, this is amazing. I mean, you gotta look at like Katrina Lake with Stitch Fix. She kept 25% of the company and got $2 billion company IPO. That's just freaking amazing. And she should be hailed as a genius, just like Drew Houston, for keeping so much of her company. But sadly, the bias, the equipment, they're just like, oh, no. She just was struggling. And I'm like, well, don't look at her check. Like, look at her bank account. I don't know if she's struggling now. Right? So, I certainly think that for women who are going out there, definitely be aware of the waters, what Joanne is saying of, what are ways that are just, sadly, I think, no offense, but investors are like lemmings, and there's these like little trigger points in there. And if you could say some of these trigger points of like, building the market from bottoms up, and it's like, hey, this is like such a big market, right? Like there's just like these weird trigger points, and it's like, and we're the team to do this because right? Like it's just like nailing those trigger points. And I know at that point for many women, it might feel like they're riding with their right hand when they're left-handed or something in that world, like just not riding with their dominant hand. So there are certain things that I think, you should be aware of. And even as Joanne's saying, like all those things, it can be done. It just, the needle has to be threaded. Like you row differently with chopsticks than you do with an oar, right?
So how much should people really be thinking about it? Like, as a female entrepreneur, I feel like I see two different camps of people. Like there's one camp of woman who's like, being a woman is totally irrelevant. I don't have any sympathy for people who have a victim complex. And they do very well because, if you don't think about it, you just plow on right ahead. You don't think about the fact that you're rowing with a chopstick. You think everybody has a chopstick. And then on the other hand, you have people who are like very hyper conscious of it. And when you think about the social justice issues too much, it can sometimes be paralyzing. So what is the right balance of the two? And how can, as an individual, you sort of wrap your head around all of these issues while not losing your drive?
I think it's really important that we do focus on this issue. I've worked in predominantly male-dominated industries my whole entire life: engineering, Wall Street, founding a company, and this is the first time that I've seen so much proactive effort and so much I think result because of that. There were all these sexual harassment issues. Tech did not have a checks and balances in terms of a place for founders to go, and I think now the market is much more conscientious of that. And this was a 6 to 12 months effort. So I'm very, very impressed with that. The other part is I agree with you guys. I think VCs are lemmings. There are not enough role models to look to. Like Katrina is awesome because now people will look at her and be like, oh,
but that's only one,
that's
right?
only
like
one,
the more
right?
we can get, the more. I'm just fighting for the right to be seen as an individual. I'm not fighting for the right to just be a Borg. So we just need more.
We absolutely need more. And I also think we need more investors who have diverse backgrounds, right? Like one of the things I'm trying to do is to convince women in executive positions at companies to think about angel investing. Like the thing that I hear from founders over and over and over again is like, I cannot raise my seed round. Right, we're Series A investors, although we'll look at seed investing as well. But women, when they're starting off, just don't have kind of the natural networks to go to, because there's not enough women angel investors, in my opinion. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is assemble like groups of potential angels and kind of teach them personally how to think about investing a little bit more. And I find that men are much more just comfortable, throwing out some money, and women are like, oh, I need to learn how to do this, right? So
I also think more men have more money as well. So there is that type of aspect. And then the more founders that we can have to get successful exits, the more they can become angel investors, and that kind of virtuous cycle. So there is just more money that they tend to have.
that's true. I mean, one of the things that we have it's more of an experiment is we'll put together really, really small sources of funds and ask the potential angels to contribute, like, let's say 10% or 20%, right? So that takes care of the money issue that you're talking about, and then get more of those people going off the ground.
Do you think then that having more women as venture capitalists necessarily leads to more women being funded?
That's like the $20 billion question, because it's funny that we were talking about the All Raise initiative, which is a consortium of many of the women VCs in the Valley, and that's the one that, like, that's a question that they are trying to answer. That's the assumption right now. That's the thesis, is that if we can get more women in there, I also think more women will just come naturally out of the woodwork. I do think some women, they just look at this tech space and they're like, this just isn't for me, and this isn't for us, and it just automatically, like, how many more amazing women are not coming into venture? Like, how many more, like, Katrina Lakes are we missing because they never even think about asking for capital? Secretly, from a founder point of view, it's probably the best idea to raise as little as you can, make as much as you can, and keep as much as you can. But on the VC side, we're all like, they're trying to get in and help you boost that and be a part of that success as well. So I think that there is that huge issue of how do we pull it out? I think it makes a lot of logical sense, and it's definitely should not be, because you don't have the clear-cut data, should not mean that you shouldn't do it, right? And I think you see it naturally where they start, going back to your original question about should I just ignore being a woman or not? So Marissa Meyer, she's like amazing, but I remember early on, and this is very public, she's like, when they ask her about being a woman, she says, well, I don't think of myself as a woman, I think of myself as a nerd or a geek or Googler first. And I used to take that approach as well, but come to find out, everybody else looks at you like a woman and treats you like a woman. You're like, oh, okay, something's a little bit off here. But the most amazing thing with her is when she took over Yahoo as CEO, automatically her team was like 50% women, from a person who doesn't admit she's a woman, right? Like, that's like amazing. So I'm a huge fan of getting like either more women in like decision-making roles, either in giving money, giving them power, right? Like automatically, it's like 50%. I was like, that is amazing. So I think that there is something about likes like. That's just how we are as human nature. This is why tribes happen, clans happen. There's just something about that.
Sonali, of the entrepreneurs that you advise, do you find that they're also looking for female VCs and that's like a comforting presence to them?
Yeah, I don't think it's a one-to-one of, if I'm a female VC, I am going to, necessarily only fund women, or vice versa. If I'm a woman entrepreneur, that I'm necessarily going to just seek a VC who is a woman. But I think it's to your bigger point of women in authority and being able to see that across the board and not just associating the people who are holding the money, the VCs, as men, and great, we have more women entrepreneurs. That balance in the conversation more broadly doesn't make sense versus the one-to-one. So of the women that I've been advising, not one of them mentioned, looking in particular for a woman to fund what they were doing.
As long as it's money.
As long as it's money, it's important. But at the same time, they were conscientious of the networks or the companies that they were going to for money, and that there was a female partner as part of the organization, or how that company is speaking about supporting women entrepreneurs in general. So that was important, because there are, this is now getting a little philosophical, but I think there's a little male and female in all of us. So whether it's, a man sitting at the table, it is important that they're really all about building an entrepreneur with whatever great assets and strengths that they have, and that might be a woman who's different than a man.
So this is a question that I've always had about female VCs, and tell me if I'm wrong. So, in some sense, as a female venture partner, you are the token woman already at the table. and you have to build your business and you have to show that you can make good investments. And when you're trying to convince the group to invest in an unknown, which is more frequently than not a female entrepreneur, you're putting your political capital on the line, in essence, for something that might fail. And if it fails, it will look badly on you because you are the female venture capitalist that made this bad investment. Does that ever cross your mind? And is it something that you feel negatively impacts female entrepreneurs?
No. So I don't really think of myself as the female VC at my firm. One of the reasons why I initially joined Foundation Capital is because Foundation was actually co-founded by a woman, Catherine Gould, 20-something years ago, and she unfortunately passed away a few years back, but I admired her because she was a really great investor, and she was very strong-willed. She obviously thought about this issue very differently at the time. She's like, I ignore that I'm a woman, period, right? But her being there made a huge difference for me to join. So that was important. Now, as someone who invests in entrepreneurs, I don't actually think of it that way. I think the thing that I do want to commit to female founders is I will take the extra 5 minutes or 10 minutes of my time to try to help. It does not mean that I'm going to back that person because they're a man or woman or African American or Latin American or whatever that is. I'm going to back that person because I believe that person will build a large business. I do think diversity in venture firms is really, really, really important because we cannot understand pain points and markets and personalities unless there is a diverse set of people and cultures, right? So whether that's gender, or companies or networks or something else.
Okay, I've been told to wrap this up, so everybody has to say one piece of advice to raising the funds, which is the title of the panel.
Like from a founder side or from?
How do you raise the funds?
You have to go out there and row, whether you got chopsticks or an oar, just row.
Love it. Joanne?
We're always looking for awesome founders.
I've seen the thing that speaks the most is just being very authentic and commanding. To the first point, I know that's so easy to say, but in sales pitches, especially in terms of raising money, I've seen that that's where a lot of male entrepreneurs are able to say, to your point, I'm just going to do it and this is what I'm going to do. And they'll push back a little bit. And so I would encourage female entrepreneurs to really find that authentic voice and go find your champions. We always try to take the hard route, I feel like.
All right, thank you to our panelists, Holly Liu, Joanne Chen, and Sonali Kothari.
Thanks, guys.